Please welcome the Mayor of Denver, Michael Hancock.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening. Let me first start by recognizing, don't go, Master Sergeant Michael Martinez for that beautiful rendition of our national anthem. Thank you, Master Sergeant, and thank you for your service to the United States of America. Absolutely. I also would like to take a moment to welcome some of our state leaders who are joining us this evening. Hold your applause, and then we will give special thank you to all of them at one time. I'll ask you when I read your name to please stand so folks can see you. U.S. Attorney John Walsh, Colorado State Attorney General John Suthers, Colorado State Senate President Brandon Schaefer, Colorado State Senators Ted Harvey and Tim Neville, Colorado State Representatives Nancy Todd, Bob Gardner, and Crisanta Duran, Denver City Council Member Jenny Robb, Arapahoe County Commissioner Bill Holen, Aurora City Council Member Debbie Holen, as well as all of the first responders from across the state of Colorado. Please give our leaders a hand. On behalf of the City and County of Denver, I'd like to welcome all of you to tonight's grand opening event of the Counterterrorism Education Learning Lab's newly redesigned exhibit, which I hope all of you have had a chance to see earlier this evening. Over the past 3 weeks, we have not only witnessed the extraordinary power and resilience of our communities during challenging times, but also the vital importance of our safety providers. As wildfires ravaged through our state, brave men and women from communities all across Colorado banded together to push back the flames and protect our citizens and our infrastructure. Absolutely. These men and women risked their lives for our community. 2 weeks ago, Denver police officer Selena Hollis was killed while trying to break up a fight during the jazz concert at City Park. Her death was a stark reminder of the sacrifices made by those whose goal is to protect and serve the citizens. While these events have shifted our immediate focus, they have also strengthened our resolve to do what is necessary to protect ourselves from these threats, both foreign and domestic. The greatest test in the 21st century will be defined by the ability of nations to work collectively to meet the continuing specter of international terrorism head on. Let me park for just a moment and acknowledge someone who is in the audience who doesn't know that I'm going to do this. But this week, I had the awesome privilege of attending a ceremony where we honored the men and women who lost their lives, who gave the ultimate sacrifice as this nation pushed back against terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan. Will you join me in welcoming and saying hello to General Edwards, who commands our National Guard here in Colorado? And it was my pleasure. General Edwards, see here? There he is. Thank you, General Edwards. Thank you, General Edwards, and I will say once again, it was an honor and a pleasure to share the stage with you as we honored the 92 servicemen and women who lost their lives from Colorado, who lost their lives in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It is again a stark reminder of the importance and the ultimate sacrifice that our young men and women are making to protect this nation, to make sure that what happened on 9/11 never ever again happens in this United States of America or anywhere else throughout this world. And so we thank our men and women in uniform. As mayor, I have taken considerable measures here in Denver to cooperate with local, state, and national authorities to keep our city safe. This endeavor requires cooperation at all levels, including the need for community engagement. The CEL's new exhibit and educational forums like this continue to bring to light the necessary awareness and education to help this endeavor. I want to thank my good friend, Larry Meisel, my good friend and advisor. He's like the little voice in my ear about doing what's right and doing what is necessary, for putting his resources and his reputation and energy behind what is right. Larry, you represent the very best of what Denver is and the very best of what Colorado is. Thank you for what you've done. Denver is proud that the CEL has become a center of excellence and a nationally recognized leader in terrorism prevention. Tonight, we have the opportunity to engage with one of the nation's top experts and someone who knows firsthand the importance of community involvement in homeland security and beyond, Secretary Michael Chertoff. In a moment, the founder of the CEL, Larry Meisel, will introduce the moderator of this evening's event and other distinguished guests. But before doing that, we will hear from the CEL's founding director, Courtney Meisel, and the executive director, Miss Melanie Perlman. Please give them a hand as they come to the stage, and thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Hancock, for those powerful remarks. I want to extend my sincere appreciation to you and the City of Denver for hosting tonight's program. Since the CEL first opened its doors in 2009, we have witnessed a continued evolution of threats, from homegrown extremists to cyber terrorism and rising tensions in the Middle East. It is clear that terrorism will continue to impact societies both here at home and abroad for generations to come. What is also becoming clear is that our government alone cannot stop its proliferation. It requires the help of educated and engaged individuals like you and me. That is the import of the CEL. The CEL is a nonprofit, nonpartisan institute dedicated to terrorism prevention. We have attracted over 100 U.S. dignitaries and sitting officials, launched the award-winning video recognizing the 8 signs of terrorism, and have hosted 16 symposia featuring a long list of sought-after speakers, including Secretary Napolitano, Secretary Ridge, and now Secretary Chertoff. Our community awareness program, the CAP, will be launched nationally with the International Association of Chiefs of Police this year. We have a number of CAP classes taught by fire and law enforcement that you can register for today at our newly launched website, thecel.org.
The CEL is truly honored to be part of the fabric of public safety and has the privilege to work with extraordinary professionals that dedicate their lives to protecting all of ours. We want to recognize the Denver Post, our premier sponsor, whose support has helped us to attract thousands of new visitors and has broadened our impact in the community. And of course, we appreciate our sponsors, partners, and board of directors for helping us continue to work to achieve our mission. The CEL is fortunate to have such an incredible staff whose work and dedication is really the backbone of our success. I want to recognize here tonight Christina Gradias, our Director of Operations, who really is the backbone. Christina, thank you. Suzanne Sable, who's been with us for the last 3 years, a program coordinator, and a number of new faces, Amy Jacobs, Director of Visitor Services, Catherine Goodman, our communication specialist, and Heather Abba, our database and office administrator. A couple of other key consultants, Zane D. Herrera and David Cohen from Brownstein, Hine and Farber, who couldn't be here with us tonight. And of course, Larry Meisel's assistant, Laura Teal, who's really integral to our success. So thank you.
Please welcome Larry A. Meisel, founder of The Cell.
Thank you, Courtney and Melanie, for putting all this together. You guys have done a great job, and Melanie, you've really been special. Thank you. Tonight we have the opportunity to engage with two of our nation's leading security experts and from one of the most respected media moguls in our country. I have the honor of introducing these distinguished gentlemen and friends. I'd like to first introduce the moderator of tonight's discussion, a true leader in the nation, and of course my dear friend Dean Singleton, who has just completed his term as chairman of the board of Associated Press, which he served as 13 years. He is founder and CEO of Media News Group, the second largest newspaper company in the United States. Dean is currently chairman and publisher of the Denver Post and the Salt Lake Tribune, the most premier newspapers in the region. He is not only one of our nation's most brilliant pioneers in the newspaper industry, but as I previously commented, he's a dear friend of all of ours, and I'm very pleased and honored to have Dean here this evening. And next to me, a good friend, one maybe some of you knew from Colorado from the old days. Those of you that heard my comments a little earlier, he was with Brand X when Dean had first acquired the Post. Brand X isn't with us, but Cliff went on to be one of the most important persons really in the intelligence research area in the private sector. He is not only the president, but he's also the founder of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, one of the nation's absolutely most highly regarded institutes. The Daily Telegraph named him one of the 100 most influential conservatives in America. He is a frequent contributor to some of the nation's most respected news programs. Many of you have seen him on TV, on radio, in the print media, and most important, he's a good friend of ours and a good friend of mine, Cliff May. We're very honored tonight to have someone who's really served our country during a most important period of time. Secretary Chertoff is currently chairman of the Chertoff Group, and he was Secretary of Homeland Security from 2005 to 2009. He led the efforts to protect our country from terrorism and the transformation of FEMA into an effective organization. At the Chertoff Group, he provides strategic counsel to a broad range of security issues. He also served as a judge in the United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit and as a federal prosecutor. It is a real honor to welcome to Colorado a friend of ours, someone who has been most important to the United States and really to the free world, Secretary Chertoff.
Larry, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. And Mr. Mayor, thank you for your wise remarks. It is only a coincidence that both of us turned up wearing bright yellow ties. So obviously we were on the same wavelength here. Larry, I want to compliment you on the cell. I had the opportunity before coming here to speak to look at the exhibit, and it really is a very moving exhibit. It touches all of us personally. One of the things that's important, though, is it's not just an exhibit which you passively absorb, but it is really part of a larger effort to educate and empower citizens so that they can be involved in protecting their own communities. And whether it's dealing with terrorism or natural disasters, I think one of the things we all learn is that our effectiveness in securing our communities depends upon individual effort by every member of the community. You know, it's not a well-known thing, but some of the most significant plots that have been discovered and disrupted by law enforcement have been a result of a tip by a private citizen, somebody who saw something and spoke up and brought it to the attention of the police or the FBI or overseas to the relevant law enforcement authorities. So whether it is being on the lookout for suspicious behavior or helping a neighbor out when there's a natural disaster, individual involvement is the cornerstone of our security, and I think this exhibit and this entire effort is a testament to that. I thought I'd talk very briefly before we get into the panel discussion about what I see as the kind of current state of threats, particularly as it relates to terrorism, as we enter the second decade of the 21st century. We've had some good news in the counterterrorism front. Most recently, of course, the elimination of Osama bin Laden was a welcome arrival of justice for someone who was responsible for the worst atrocity in American history. And I want to pay tribute to everybody who was involved in that, from the president on down to the special operators who went in and did that job in such a magnificent way. I've been lucky over the last 10 years to have worked side by side with some unbelievably noble and heroic people, all of whom have contributed to the reduction of the threat as it originally was presented back in 2001. But the fact that the threat has changed does not mean that it's gone away. And I want to talk briefly about several areas in which I think we're seeing new facets of the threat of terrorism and risk to our security emerging. First, Al-Qaeda itself, although they have suffered serious blows against the top leadership over the last 10 years, continues to change and morph and spread around various parts of the world. We not only continue to see it in Afghanistan and in parts of Pakistan, but it's now generally acknowledged that Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, in Yemen, has become the most aggressive threat against the United States, seeking in a number of disruptive plots to actually cause death and destruction here in our own country. We've seen Al-Qaeda spread in North Africa. We've seen affiliated groups in Nigeria, in Somalia. Most recently in Mali, extremist groups have now begun to descend from Libya into the northern part of Mali and now threaten the security of that state. In many ways, Al-Qaeda, which is an ideology, has become a franchise operation in which the doctrine and the propaganda energize groups that adapt to their own local circumstances, and some of which treat it as an opportunity to strike back against the United States. So much as I would like to tell you that the end of Al-Qaeda is in sight, what I predict for you is that we will see it continue to morph and continue to evolve. The tactics may change, the strategies may change, but it will be incumbent on us to evolve our own defensive and security strategies to meet these new threats. If we put aside the fact that bin Laden openly boasted of it, and that we witnessed this with our own eyes, I think we're well past the point of denying that he was responsible for 9/11, just as I think we all really understand I think we also really understand there was actually a landing on the moon. So Al-Qaeda remains as a threat. But I wish I could tell you that was the only threat. But what has been described at times as the A-team of terrorism is not actually Al-Qaeda, but it is Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as you know, is an Iranian-sponsored and backed terrorist organization which has struck against Americans and Israelis and others around the world for decades. It now plays a significant and pivotal role in Lebanon, where it is one of the most effective, if not the most effective, terrorist forces in the world. They have not struck against Americans since 1996, when they were responsible for the Khobar Towers, which were blown up in Saudi Arabia at the loss of lives of many servicemen. But they remain a very significant threat. And as we watch Iran and the tensions between Iran and other countries in the region and around the world continue to increase, monitoring Hezbollah, which operates not only in the Middle East, but in our own hemisphere, will become an increasingly important element of our national security. A little known fact is this, and I learned this from an Argentinian investigating magistrate who's been looking into for years, have been investigating the bombings of Jewish organizations in Buenos Aires in 1994. He told me a couple of years ago that in his investigation, he discovered that very soon after the Ayatollah Khomeini took over in Iran, they began to send Iranian operatives into South America in order to build a platform there for potential attacks in the Western Hemisphere. And since then, we've seen Hezbollah continue to increase its presence, most notably because of Chavez in Venezuela, who has now opened up a direct air link with Iran and created a channel for moving personnel and material from Iran into Venezuela in a way that doesn't give us much visibility. I would be incomplete in talking about what we face if I didn't discuss two other phenomena which I think touches very much here in our own country. One is transnational criminal groups. This has actually been a threat that's been developing over the last 20 or 30 years and includes some very powerful international organized groups that are rooted in Central and South America and operate in our own cities. Many of you have heard of MS-13. Many of you have seen in the news reports of some of the activities of the cartels in northern Mexico. Those groups increasingly become sophisticated, and while not politically motivated, one thing we do have to watch is the danger of criminal groups evolving into terrorist groups. This isn't just a fantasy. Some years back, the Colombian Revolutionary Army, the FARC, began to deal with terrorists. They began to deal with drug dealers. And first they began by extorting money from the drug dealers. And next they moved to actually protecting the narcotics traffickers as they conducted their illegal businesses. And finally, the FARC went into the narcotics business itself. More recently, there have been reports that as narcotics are shipped from Venezuela into Europe, the way station is North Africa, and that terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, in return for money, which they use to finance their own activities, provide security and logistical support as the drugs are staged for the final distribution in Europe. So I suggest that as we watch, particularly in our own backyard, we need to pay close attention to the development of these transnational criminal groups and where they might develop ideologically, as well as in terms of their capability, increased capability for violence. Let me talk a little bit about cybersecurity. You've all been reading increasing reports about the kind of cyber threats that we face. We now live in a world in which much of what operates in our electric grid, in our water, in our hospitals, in our banking system occurs online. And it comes from an infrastructure that was developed through the internet at a time that the presumption was that people who were online were trusted. What we've sadly learned over the last decade, and increasingly as the decade has come to a close, is that there are people who want to exploit the internet. Some of them do it for criminal purposes. Some of them do it to steal our intellectual property and to send it overseas, thereby really robbing us of our economic assets and our economic birthright. And now we even face the danger and the possibility and the risk that terrorists or nation states could decide to attack our industrial control systems and our operating systems in order to gain leverage in an international dispute. Again, this is not a fantasy. In 2007, the country of Estonia was attacked by hackers located in Russia who attempted to bring down the government systems and the banking systems. In 2008, when the Russians invaded Georgia, their military activity was accompanied by online efforts to take out the command and control system in Georgia. So this is the fourth area in which I think we're going to need to devote effort. And again, it's going to involve every single one of us, because the assets and the networks that are at risk are not largely owned by the government, they're largely owned by each of us. Finally, I'd be remiss in light of the events of what's gone on in this state with the fires over the last weeks, not to talk for a little bit about natural disasters and the importance of homeland security as it relates to protecting us from events that are not caused by terrorists or criminals, but that occur in nature. I had the experience over 4 years of seeing pretty much every kind of major natural catastrophe except for earthquakes. And time and again, no matter what the government does, no matter how much we work to invest resources in planning, and all of that is very important, from the very courageous first responders who we've got to thank, all the way up to the President of the United States. In the end, the first response lies with each of us. It's about preparation, it's about planning, it's about cooperation, it's about neighbors helping neighbors. And through that network, working at the family level, at the business level, through the local police and firefighters and EMTs, up to the National Guard and NORTHCOM, and up ultimately to the top leadership in Washington. Through that network, we're able not to eliminate disasters, because we can't stop them, but to respond, to mitigate them, to help those who are in need, and to begin the process of rebuilding. So I'd be remiss in talking about what we face with Homeland Security if I don't remind all of us that even if we could deal with all the terrorist plots and the criminals, we still have forest fires, hurricanes in some parts of the country, flooding and other kinds of disasters. And it's important we continue always to be vigilant and to arm ourselves as individuals with what we need in order to respond and protect our communities. Thank you very much.